This is a story about a neighborhood of multi-million-dollar homes in California's Silicon Valley. A story about bankruptcy, a story about wine, and murder. It's a fascinating story, and as such, I find it shocking that the Wikipedia entry is not only incomplete, but in several instances, it's just plain wrong. Paul Masson was once a powerhouse in the industry, selling over 100 million bottles of wine annually, and consisting of multiple wineries, thousands of acres of vineyards, and arguably one of the most striking tasting rooms ever constructed in California. In this video, we'll see how an unexpected newcomer shocked the wine business, leading to market challenges that would ripple through California wine for decades, fueling Paul Masson's implosion and near disappearance. And at the end, we'll examine the error-ridden Wikipedia entry for Paul Masson. There are so many fascinating aspects to the story of Paul Masson. This video could easily be over an hour long, so in the interest of time, there are some details I'll need to gloss over, but there are some that are just too good to leave out.
Ah, the French champagne.
We'll get to that shortly. Hi, my name is Eric. Thank you for joining me. Grab yourself a glass of wine and let's get started. Paul Masson, the brand, was founded in 1892, but our story doesn't begin until the late 1970s, when it was near its peak success. To get us up to that point, here's a very brief history of Paul Masson. Paul Masson was born in Burgundy, France in 1859 and emigrated to California in 1878. In 1892, he launched his namesake brand, and in 1905, he built a winery in the hills above Saratoga, California. The winery was destroyed in the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, whose epicenter was less than 50 miles away, but Paul Masson promptly rebuilt the winery. In 1919, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, making the production and sale of alcoholic beverages illegal, with an exception for wine used in religious services. For the next 13 years, Masson made minuscule profits making sacramental wine, along with some alleged bootlegging. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was passed, repealing the 18th Amendment and once again legalizing beverage alcohol in the United States. So finally, after 13 difficult years, Paul Masson was back in the legitimate wine business. In 1936, and after his wife's passing, Paul Masson was 77 years old and ready for retirement. He sold the winery and the brand bearing his name to his protege, Martin Ray. In 1940, at the age of 82, Paul Masson passed away at his home in San Jose, California, but the brand and winery lived on under Martin Ray's ownership for another 2 years. In 1942, Martin Ray sold the brand and winery to Seagram's, a large Canadian distilled spirits company. Under Seagram's management, over the next 40-plus years, the Paul Masson brand would see its most important expansion and success. Seagram's took a small brand with one small winery and grew it into a major force in the marketplace, supported by 3 additional wineries. So that brings us to the 1970s. For our story, we're interested in 5 major assets that made up Paul Masson, all of which are at this point owned by Seagram's. There's Masson's original winery in the hills above Saratoga, now called the Mountain Winery. Saratoga is on the western side of the Santa Clara Valley, an area better known today as Silicon Valley. There's the Paul Masson Champagne Cellars, built by Seagram's in 1958 and located about 15 minutes from the Mountain Winery down in the city of Saratoga. An hour and a half south, in California's Salinas Valley, the small farming town of Soledad was chosen as the site for Seagram's 3rd Paul Masson winery, which was constructed in 1968. Finally, Seagram's built a 4th winery that went online in 1974. This one is in Madera, another small farming community, but this one is in California's San Joaquin Valley. And as the 5th and most important asset, we have the Paul Masson brand itself. Here I show the brand as 2 different components, the wines and the brandy. Why I did so will make sense when we get to Wikipedia's error-filled entry for Paul Masson. So we have a brand that is being supplied by 4 different wineries. Actually, it's 3 different wineries. Seagram's shut down winemaking activities at the Mountain Winery prior to constructing the much larger and more modern winery in the city of Saratoga. The Mountain Winery was converted to an event center and concert venue. In 1958, a summer concert series was launched that, though periodically interrupted for various reasons, continues to this day. It's now the late 1970s. Paul Masson gets its wine from its 3 wineries and it gets good PR from the concert venue. So why, after 44 successful years under Seagram's ownership, did Paul Masson teeter towards collapse? Well, it was a combination of factors. A glut of wine on the market at the time, an untenable corporate strategy, and other external and internal challenges. But of all the issues contributing to the downfall of Paul Masson, there's one that stands out to me as the most interesting. In the late 1970s, Seagram's, along with the other long-established big players in California wine, are vexed by a newcomer to their business, Coca-Cola. Coke saw there was money to be made in wine and in 1977 bought their way into the business by acquiring New York-based Taylor Wines. They expanded the brand by introducing Taylor California Cellars and began using California vineyards to supply wine for the brand's growth. Coke had some amazing early success with Taylor California, thanks to an exceptionally well-conceived and executed, though shocking, launch strategy. Under Coke's leadership, Taylor California Cellars did the unthinkable. They produced TV ads that went after their competitors' quality, calling them out by name.
The world's largest gourmet society, the Chaîne de Rôtisseurs, is headed in America by the great food and wine authority Roger Yassine. Recently, he compared some California Rhine wines.
I compared Paul Masson, Almaden, Inglenook Naval, and Taylor California Cellars Rhine wines. And the wine that I preferred was Taylor California Cellars. What impresses me is how well it goes with food. Almost any dish that you would serve with a Rhine wine would taste better with Taylor California Cellars than it would with Inglenook, Almaden, or Paul Masson.
Taylor California Cellars, a better Rhine wine. Judge for yourself.
There's an intensity, an almost bullying quality to the ads that shocked and horrified the wine industry. Several lawsuits were filed against Coke, which Coke won on First Amendment grounds, but the ads were extremely effective. And, fortunately for us, they prompted Paul Masson to launch their own TV ad campaign.
It took Beethoven 4 years to write that symphony. Some things can't be rushed. Good music and good wine. Paul Masson's Emerald Dry. A delicious white wine. Paul Masson wines taste so good because they're made with such care. What Paul Masson himself said nearly a century ago is still true today. We will sell no wine before it's time.
Paul Masson's ads featured Orson Welles, the famous actor, director, screenwriter, and producer, extolling the virtues of Paul Masson wines and closing each commercial with the soon-to-be-famous tagline,
We will sell no wine before it's time. We will sell no wine before it's time. We will sell no wine before it's time.
These commercials have found new life in the YouTube age, thanks primarily to a series of outtakes featuring an apparently drunk Orson Welles.
102, take 2.
Ah, the French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There is a California champagne by Paul Masson, inspired by that same French excellence. It's fermented in the bottle, and like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated. So Paul Masson.
But let's get back to Taylor California's surprising success. Despite their effective advertising, Coke also drove sales with significant discounting, forcing their major competitors to follow suit. Coke didn't expect the old-timers in the business to respond so quickly or compete so fiercely. So less than 5 years into their foray into the wine industry, and despite impressive success in gaining market share and building brand recognition for Taylor, they wanted out. And so, in 1983, Coca-Cola sold its wine business to Seagram's. But the damage to the industry overall had already been done. As Morris Katz, who would soon become president of Seagram's Paul Masson business, said, by the time Coca-Cola went out of it, they had destroyed it. What they destroyed was whatever profitability was in the wine business, because everybody had to bring their prices down. Seagram's thought that having acquired their unruly competitor, they could leverage economies of scale, reduce costs, and bring some profitability back to that segment of the market. In 1986, and to my own personal and eternal disappointment, Seagram's shut down the Paul Masson champagne cellars in Saratoga and moved its operations to one of the company's other wineries in an effort to cut costs. Heralded as the most modern winery in America, the Paul Masson Champagne cellars included winemaking facilities for both sparkling and still wines, and a tasting room right out of Disney's Tomorrowland. It featured a spiral ramp entrance under a giant circular roof and a large fountain evoking the effervescence of champagne. The spiral ramp that visitors walked to get to the tour area featured a mosaic mural by renowned artist Jose Moya del Pino depicting the history of wine. At this point, I should note that as of 2006, US law prohibits any new sparkling wines not produced in the French region of Champagne from being called champagne. However, brands that used the term prior to 2006 are grandfathered in, and so even today you can find wines like Cook's and Andre that are labeled as California Champagne. So it wasn't terribly controversial when, in the 1950s, this new winery included champagne in its name. I would have loved to have had the chance to visit that tasting room and see that winery in operation. In fact, I went as far as paying to license this archival footage so that together we can at least get a small taste of what it would have been like to be there in person. After mothballing the winery, Seagram's began working with the city of Saratoga on a reuse plan for the site. The property was acquired by developers, and having sat vacant for years, in 1990 the winery and tasting room were demolished and 94 houses were built on the site. The development, called Belle Grove, was completed in 1996, and today houses there sell for right around $4 million. But whatever happened to Jose Moya del Pino's mosaic mural depicting the history of wine? One of the many rabbit holes I went down for this project involved reviewing Saratoga City Council meeting minutes, and I found this from one of the developers working on the permitting for the subdivision. The tile mosaic has been photographically recorded in a city heritage inventory file. Portions of the mosaic have also been preserved and could be incorporated into a future development in some manner. In the interest of time, I had to stop myself from pursuing this any further, but perhaps another intrepid soul could take up the search for the photos and the remnants of Del Pino's mural. So let's go back to our asset list. Seagram's has closed the champagne cellars, and we know the property is soon to become housing, so let's update the ownership and say that this asset is now owned by multiple individual homeowners. Unfortunately, Seagram's cost-saving efforts were too little too late. So in 1987, they sold Paul Masson, Taylor Wines, and all their associated assets to Vintners International, a company created by a group of investors for the purpose of acquiring them. And that changes our asset list to this. Almost immediately, in an attempt to make back some of the $200 million they had just spent, Vintners International began looking for a buyer for the mountain winery. Ray Collishaw, a real estate developer, purchased the mountain winery from Vintners International for $5.8 million in 1989, but lost it to bankruptcy in 1995. Ravi Kumra purchased the mountain winery from Ray Collishaw's bankruptcy proceedings for $6 million. Kumra had made his fortune in the mobile phone industry and was apparently something of an interesting character. Generous almost to a fault, he also had a dark side. He was arrested for a DUI hit and run and again for assaulting a security guard at the winery-turned-concert venue, an event that helped motivate him to sell the mountain winery. Eventually, Kumra would be murdered in his Silicon Valley home by a group of gang members that included one of the prostitutes whose company he frequently enjoyed. But that would be over a decade after he sold the winery to a group of investors that includes Hotmail founder Jack Smith and is led by developer William Hirschman. This group, calling themselves Chateau Masson Incorporated, has made significant upgrades to the mountain winery and still owns the facility today. Last year I visited the mountain winery with my little dog named Red. Still today, and despite the name, no wine is made on the property, but they have the licenses to be able to offer tastings of mountain winery branded wines that are made for them using grapes grown there on the property. This is a beautiful spot with amazing views looking out over the Silicon Valley. In fact, you can see Apple's headquarters from the patio. Tastings are Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. If you're in the area, it's definitely worth a visit, but check ahead. Sometimes tastings close early if there's a concert that day. So back to our asset list. This is how it looks now. Vintners International struggled financially, eventually going into bankruptcy. In 1993, Canandaigua Wine Company, now known as Constellation Brands, bought Vintners International and the remaining Paul Masson assets from Vintners' bankruptcy proceedings at a cost of nearly $150 million. 3 years later, Constellation sold the Soledad Winery to Golden State Vintners for $4.5 million. Golden State Vintners was itself acquired in 2004 by the Wine Group, which still owns the winery today. In 2008, the Wine Group bought the Paul Masson Madera Winery from Constellation Brands. The Wine Group, makers of Franzia, the best-selling wine in America, still owns both wineries today. So by the mid-2010s, all 4 of the old Paul Masson wineries were with the entities that own them today, but Constellation still owned the brands at that point. Paul Masson Grand Amber Brandy was going strong under Constellation's ownership, on its way to 2 million cases of annual sales. But the wines were a shadow of their former selves. They were down to only a few 100,000 cases a year for a handful of specialty markets. A few 100,000 cases sounds like a lot, and it is, but that's less than 4% of what the brand sold annually at its peak. So finally, inevitably, in 2017, Constellation made the decision to discontinue Paul Masson wines and decommission the specialty bottling line that was used to fill those distinctive carafes. By that time, Constellation Brands was experiencing great success in the beer business with Corona and Modelo, and in the high-end spirits business with brands like High West Whiskeys and Casa Noble Tequila. Their wine business, however, had developed into a sprawling operation spanning nearly every price point from value through to super luxury. So in 2019, Constellation made a major decision regarding its wine business. Going forward, they would focus on higher-end wines and sell off almost everything else. In April of 2019, Constellation announced that it would be selling several wineries and over 30 brands to Gallo for $1.7 billion, subject to regulatory approval. But that regulatory approval was not forthcoming. The Federal Trade Commission was worried that Gallo, already the largest wine producer in the U.S., would control too much of the market if they were allowed to close the deal with Constellation. Among the concerns of federal regulators was the fact that Gallo's E&J brandy and Constellation's Paul Masson brandy are the 2 biggest low-priced brandies in the United States. The FTC would not approve any deal that gave Gallo control of both of these brands. So Constellation found another buyer for Paul Masson brandy in the form of Sazerac, the parent company of Fireball, as well as my brother's favorite bourbon, Buffalo Trace. With this and a handful of other concessions to the FTC, the sale of 27 wine brands, including Paul Masson, was completed in January of 2021. Constellation sold those brands, along with 5 of their other wineries unrelated to our Paul Masson story, to Gallo for $810 million. Later that year, Sazerac closed on its $255 million acquisition of Paul Masson brandy. So this is our final and current state of things. The Mountain Winery is owned by Chateau Masson Inc. and continues hosting concerts. The Champagne Cellars has been torn down and replaced with houses. Both the Soledad and Madera wineries are still in operation under the ownership of the Wine Group. The wine brand is owned by Gallo, and Sazerac owns the brandies. Things may change in the future, but as of late September 2023, that's where things stand. So now let's pull up the Wikipedia page on Paul Masson and give it a once-over. We can skip over the biographical information on Paul Masson the man. And there's some interesting stuff here, but let's scroll on down to Centerra. Centerra was one of Canandaigua's operating companies, and as we saw earlier, Canandaigua is now known as Constellation Brands. But look here, it says, in 2008, the Paul Masson wine line was sold by Constellation Brands along with the Paul Masson Winery to the Wine Group. That's wrong. The Paul Masson wine line was never sold to the Wine Group. And look at this section. It says, in a $134 million deal in 2008, Wine Group LLC of San Francisco purchased the Paul Masson Winery, which had ceased making wine in 1952 and now serves as a conferencing and event center. Wine Group LLC subsequently removed the Paul Masson name and renamed it the Mountain Winery. But the Mountain Winery was never owned by Constellation and never sold to the Wine Group. Whoever wrote this probably had no clue that there were actually 4 different wineries associated with Paul Masson, and didn't realize that the Paul Masson Madera Winery was even a thing. So this is wrong. And it goes on to say, as part of the deal, Wine Group LLC also purchased 2 California wine brands from Constellation Brands, including the Paul Masson table wine range. This is also wrong. If the authors of this Wikipedia entry bothered to read even the titles of the references they cited, they'd know that the 2 brands the wine group acquired from Constellation were Almaden and Inglenook, not Paul Masson. It was Constellation Brands that quietly discontinued the carafes, not the wine group. And finally, in this section on the sale of the brandies to E&J Gallo, the brandies were not sold to Gallo. This was specifically disallowed by the Federal Trade Commission. The brandies were sold to Sazerac. The rights to the brand do not remain with the wine group. They were never owned by the wine group. They were sold to Gallo by Constellation in 2021. As frustrating as all of these errors are, the total absence of any reference whatsoever to the Saratoga Champagne cellars is just disappointing. So as I mentioned, it's now September of 2023, so depending on when you're watching this video, hopefully somebody has gone in and fixed this Wikipedia entry. This is an excellent object lesson on the accuracy and completeness of Wikipedia entries, or should I say the possible lack thereof. In my research for this video, it was eye-opening seeing how many other online resources are propagating Wikipedia's errors. So we've charted the fall of a once important wine brand. The way was littered with corporate bankruptcies and major challenges that reverberated throughout the wine business. This is interesting history, and we can draw our conclusions and make our judgments, but we should remember that all this history involved real people with real lives. The Champagne Cellars on its own was, at the time, the second largest employer in Saratoga, with over 300 employees. But there were winners in all of this. The wine consumer who benefited from low prices. It's easy for those of us who might prefer to drink more expensively to poo-poo the mainstream wines on the market, but they're made by real people and enjoyed by real people. So here's to competition and low prices, and may affordable wines always be available at the grocery store. And to Gallo, I wish you the best of luck bringing Paul Masson wines back to the American marketplace. Cheers.